We are going to follow the money.
Everything you need to know can be understood with this simple phrase: follow the money. And believe me, that's what's happening.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to College Sports Follow the Money, an all-new podcast diving into the critical issues surrounding the big business of college sports. I'm Andrew Monaco, joined by former president of Texas A&M University and former chancellor at the University of Missouri, Dr. R. Bowen Loftin, and former vice president and general manager of Fox Sports Southwest, Jon Heidtke. From NIL to the transfer portal and opt-outs, to the college football playoff, conference realignment, and more, we tackle the key issues facing college athletics today and into the future.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money! He's the loudest black man!
Happy New Year, everyone, from Follow the Money. It is a new year, it is a new episode, but you're stuck with the same old three this time around. Alongside Dr. R. Bowen Loftin, alongside Jon Heidtke, I'm Andrew Monaco. Happy New Year, my friends.
Happy New Year, Andrew.
Happy New Year, gentlemen.
It is 2025, and on this edition of Follow the Money, episode 71, we're going to talk about, are we going to miss the NIL era? Because we're going to go post-NIL era. We're going to talk about four letters that you better get used to hearing: N, L, R, and B, if you didn't already get used to NIL. We're also talking about the House settlement that could come and become settled in April. But we will start with this post-NIL era, Dr. Loftin, and some schools that are already making moves to transition to the NIL to now, for lack of a better phrase, Dr. Loftin, a salary cap for all these schools, and how this money will now be broken down.
Well, what we know right now is if the House settlement proceeds as we think it will, and the Judge Wilken decides it will be the law of the land beginning sometime in April, by July 1, everybody has to be ready to go. So July 1 will be the start of this year of the post-NIL era, but it's not totally post, is it? NIL will not go away. It'll probably shrink a bit and be regulated, presumably. So what we know right now is that given the House settlement in draft form, $20.5 million in the next fiscal year will go to the athletes in the Power 4 schools. I'm still stuck in the old days. The Power 4 schools. What has been not clear yet is how each school will divide the money up. I had hoped and opined a while back that the conferences would get together and at least at a conference level dictate what, in fact, the distribution would be. That has not happened yet, and it may not happen. We know here in Texas that Texas Tech has at least published a very specific list of what they're going to pay to their various sports. We have from a very good reporter at Yahoo Sports and their interview with Ross Bjork and the president of Ohio State University, what they're going to do there in broader terms, not very specific, but broader terms anyway. And so far, it looks like football will get the lion's share of the money, which is not surprising. Men's basketball will be number 2, perhaps women's basketball number 3, perhaps baseball number 3 or 4, and then everything else, basically, that will be out there. And I think each conference sort of has a sense of what their sports in terms of priorities are. If you look at the SEC right now, it's pretty clear that we got a darn good basketball conference. Mm-hmm. You know that, Andrew, from first-hand observation anyway. And we also have a very strong baseball, lineage as well in the SEC. Not to mention, of course, the granddaddy, which is football. So those three sports certainly stand out, as Texas Tech has pointed out to us as well. And what each school decides to do, if that's the way it goes, that's going to be interesting to watch that and to see the priorities that are out there. But we're not totally post-NIL guys. And this is where I want your comments to really be addressing here is the idea that NIL will be there at a smaller value because now presumably again, after the settlement, there's going to be a requirement, a very strong requirement, that every contract with an athlete has to have a very clear definition of the athlete's responsibility. What will they do? And that is going to be regulated. So any deal more than $600, which isn't much, is going to be reported to this new NIL oversight group run by a very famous accounting firm named Deloitte. And they're going to want to see the contract, and they're going to want to understand what the athlete will do in return for the money they're given. So there's not going to be a gift here at all. It's going to be a requirement. Now, my question for you guys is this enforceable? How are you going to, for every single athlete, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of players here, how are you going to make sure that the $1,000 they got from Joe Blow Auto is turning into an appearance and a signing opportunity and things like that for this particular player? How do you really prove that? Are you going to depend on people reporting it if it's not happening? I just don't know. So I guess the comments I want to hear from the experts here, Jon Heidtke and Andrew Monaco, are what do you think about the ability to manage this? And if you manage it, how do you enforce the compliance with the terms of a contract across thousands of people? And this is not a huge team that Deloitte's putting forth here, as far as I can tell anybody.
Yeah, I think, again, they're trying to start to put some guardrails around this. And I think, again, that's still going to be very hard because most of that cattle's already out of the barn. But I do think, again, they are trying to create some guardrails around this. And I think that the salary cap, what you're seeing, is certainly going to help the majority of the players or the student athletes in that world. And I think, again, the NIL world is going to still be, again, in its pure sense and following the letter of the law, it's certainly doable. I mean, we saw Quinn Ewers in a Dr. Pepper commercial. You saw Juju Watkins and Caitlin Clark in a State Farm commercial. I mean, those are significant deals, and they're certainly legit. And Deloitte & Touche would probably put a very high value on those because there's probably a fair market rate to see that. But there are a lot of other ones out there. I mean, I just was watching the Ohio State. Jack Sawyer has an NIL deal where he created, I didn't even know Scoop and Score was a trademark, but he came up with that with some T-shirts, and he's selling those T-shirts. What's to stop some alumni from just buying all those T-shirts and giving them away to to needy kids? So there's always going to be a way that no matter what rules you put in place, someone are going to find ways to circumvent it. And I think, again, those schools and those collectives, I mean, again, I think we've seen two different schools of thoughts on collectives now. Schools like Colorado are folding their collective as they head into this world. Others are leaning into their collectives more because they know this is the way that they're going to create that added bonus or that, there are ways to skirt the salary cap, to come up with these different types of opportunities. I mean, Andrew, I think, and I have talked about this over the years, but back when the NBA was trying to do this, how do you stop an owner from giving a player, his home in, whatever fabulous place for 2 months, and that doesn't count against the salary cap? Those were things like that were happening. And I think you're going to see only that times 10 in this new world where people are going to find, again, you can't legislate everything. All right. There's a certain part where sportsmanship needs to take a part. And again, to your point, can the conference create a set of rules that everybody's agreeing to, hopefully play by? But again, there'll be others out there, collectives out there that may, even though the university may not necessarily want them to do that, they can still, operate in a world where they're probably not going to get fined or shut down or sanctioned. So that's, to me, is the most interesting thing out there. And again, it'll be interesting to see how those schools, and particularly how those collectives that want to, to get that leg up on recruiting or whatever the advantage is, starts to come up with those different types of opportunities. And it's not going to be if, it's going to be when.
To me, when we got away from name, image, likeness and made it NIL, if a player's using his name or a school is using a player's name, the image or the likeness, absolutely should get rewarded. We went fast forward to pay for play. So I have no problem with if you're going to sell that shirt with Scoop and Score trademark, no problem, because we're doing it. If someone wants to go to, look, it used to be that you couldn't use the school or the colors for long snappers camp, right? Now he can do that. I totally get that. Yeah. Here's the thing that I think is coming, because when NIL came in, it was states were going to decide, and the schools were out of it. And everything was outside the school. What I think happens now, Dr. Loftin, is schools will take control of the NIL. You use the word compliance, which I think is a key word. It's not going to be the same as compliance departments in the athletics. But you're going to have to comply with rules that there will be someone in an athletic department's NIL department will say, this player did this for this much, and maybe that goes to Deloitte, or maybe that goes to the NCAA. Instead of grades and attendance and this and that, I think it may be that way with NIL. But I think as of July, you may see more and more schools now getting a handle on NIL. It's always been on the outside and someone else handling it. I have a feeling more of these schools, colleges, universities are going to have people within their athletic department having their hands on NIL going forward.
I think you're right, Andrew. That seems to be the most likely way for this to proceed. And again, if you look at what the NCAA president has said, just the other day, he came out and said, we need federal intervention here. He specifically asked for a few things. He said, look, we need to have one law, not 30,
right?
That governs how we do this. We need antitrust protection so we can manage our portal and our issues of that nature without fear of being sued by every single athlete out there, as we're being sued right now. We need that. So I think at least he's been very clear. And it turns out that a senator from the state of Texas is now the head of the Commerce Committee in the Senate. And he has said publicly that he is concerned about this, and he thinks it's an appropriate topic to address now. So maybe for the first time ever, we have the alignment of congressional leadership with sports leadership to say we got to do something. So maybe we'll have a bill coming through the Senate initially, and probably the House secondarily, that will actually address this issue at a national level and obviate these 30 plus state laws that are out there right now that are not all the same. Quite a few are very different from each other. And it's really causing a lot of problems. And we try to make compliance work nationally. How do you do that with 30 or 30 plus laws that are in play there? So I think that's an important thing as well. The other thing to keep in mind here is that the whole process of the settlement has defined roster limits. So every single sport now has a roster limit proposed for it. And there is no longer a limit on scholarship numbers. So in principle, if you got the money, every single player could have a full scholarship within that roster limit. So we have a salary cap, as John called it, which is a correct name, I think, for it, coming from the $20.5 million that so far it appears every school is going to define for themselves. And then we have, the guesses are out there, 3 million, 5 million, 7 million, what the number will be, we don't really know yet, for a Power 4 school. That'll be their NIL number. And it's going to be overseen by this Deloitte bunch. And we'll have every player getting more than $600 reporting their contract and presumably reporting what they do to fulfill that contract. I'd see it being very difficult. I think John's right that there's going to be, and you're right too, there's going to be a person or persons at the bigger schools doing this. It's likely the Power, or the Group of 5 schools and others may choose to go with a company that they'll hire to manage this for them. That's a possibility. There are companies already out there. They're trying to be the collective of collectives, shall we say. They're going to try to assemble collectives and have them work together. There's even a company right now putting out standardized contracts that's actually publishing contracts that they think they can make work for a school to make sure everybody has the same format of contract, the same elements of the contract, and you plug in the numbers and the thing and the specific job that the kid will do based on that. That's happening right now, especially for schools that aren't too big. So I think that's out there. But I think we should also talk in a minute about what some schools are doing. We have some information right now, thanks again to Yahoo Sports, about Texas Tech and their public declaration of what they're going to be spending from this $20.5 million, where they're going to spend it. Ross Bjork and the president of Ohio State have also come out and begun to define what Ohio State will do, and that's a biggie, obviously much bigger than Texas Tech in terms of budget and numbers of sports and athletes. So we're beginning to see a little bit of the fog lifting on the landscape of what will be put out there by each school to pay their athletes for play. That's happening right now, guys. So let's see how we work through that. John, comments? Andrew?
I think, John, this reminds me of being in the NBA where we benchmarked everybody else. I think schools are going to wait for the Techs and the Ohio State, some schools, to see what are they doing, and that might end up being the template for what they do.
Yeah. And again, if you're, let's just say you're not a traditional football power, do you stick at 85 scholarships there and you're a little bit better in baseball or one of the other Olympic sports, and you shift a few more over there to just give you a little, opportunity to recruit a little bit better athlete in that particular situation. So I think you'll see some of that going on there too. The other thing I think about too, again, as you look at the NFL world, is, let's just say, again, I saw news today that Quinn Ewers was going to go to the draft. And I think if there's anybody out there that could take advantage of the situation, it would be him right now, because he could go to any of these schools, because, again, it doesn't take effect until July 1st. And he can get, let's just say, some of the published reports, $6 million for one more year. And I would think, again, that would be something I think he would look to do. And then if he's getting that $6 million, he probably doesn't need the whatever he's going to get from that scholarship, and that money could then be probably spread around in some other areas too. So as you look at teams in the NFL or any of the professional sports, they do things, defer, renegotiate contracts all the time, do things along that to help them meet their salary cap needs. And I think you could see certainly NIL money be shifted toward a potential player like that, an Arch Manning or someone who's got that type of pizzazz. They can get that money. You'll get additional money outside the NIL. Then can that school take that person's money that you're going to be earmarked to him in that salary cap level and spread it somewhere else? So again, certainly they're trying to create a framework here, but again, there's so many holes in that boat right now. It'll be interesting to see again how those holes get exploited.
Dr. Loftin, you talked about Charlie Baker. Go ahead.
Yeah. I wanted to drill down a bit here. Let's talk about specific numbers here just for a moment here. Ohio State's budget is around $275 million per year for athletics. Okay, probably the biggest in the country. It covers about 1,000 athletes in 36 sports. So that's kind of the biggie. Okay, and the speculation right now is that they're going to distribute their money proportionally based on male-female split in sports and market. Now, market's where you come in, John. I mean, TV market, social media, those kind of things here. But right now, the proposal seems to be 90% of that money, $20.5 million, will go to football and men's basketball. So 90% to two sports, football and basketball. Very different numbers. 85 on the roster for football, 15 for basketball. 13 to 16 million. Therefore, of that money will be football, 2 to 4 million to men's basketball, and the rest divided up among the rest, basically. The one thing that's really precise is Texas Tech. They very clearly said, we're going to give 74% of our $20.5 million to football. That's $15.1 million. We're going to give $3.6 million to men's basketball. That's 17.5% of the overall number. We're going to give $410,000 to women's basketball. That's 2%. And we're going to give $390,000. That's 1.9% to baseball. Okay. We're going to give $920,000, $920,000 to all other sports. Okay. They got 19 there, probably something like that at Texas Tech right now. So you're talking about 4 from 19, 15 sports will share about 920,000. And some of those sports are pretty good size. So that's going to be interesting to watch how that plays out, basically. I think it's interesting, too, that Ohio State has said we're going to create 91 new scholarships on top of what we had already in place, 58 of those going to women. That'll add a $4.5 million number to their budget for that purpose anyway. So these are becoming hard numbers coming out here. And I'm wondering, again, from your standpoint, if we talk about splitting based on market, I mean, TV is pretty easy, right, John? But is social media that easy? How do you really begin to measure the marketability of a particular athlete? That's a question I think is going to be pondered, and I'd like to have your thoughts about that as well.
Well, social media is a different measuring stick than sort of market size. Give you an example. New York's the top market. If you live in New York, you'll get a higher percentage of things from that standpoint. But if you're social media, you'll have fans or influencers or contacts all across the country. So I think that will be just based on sheer size at the end of the day, or how many people you can kind of attract to that standpoint. So again, there are values for that. The Juju Watkins in a commercial like that, you can understand that that's something you can see value, and that's probably a significant value. That's something you can determine. But when I'm working for the local car dealer who's a big booster who just wants me to come down there and sign autographs for 2 hours one day and take pictures, all right, the standard rate for that may be $600, but that person might get paid $10,000 because that's what they wanted to do. How can you legislate a bad business deal? I wanted to pay this person to come out because I know it would generate more fans. So there are going to be things along those lines that I think, again, it's going to be very hard to create an apples to apples comparison. And heaven help the poor group that's trying to sit out there and say, okay, who's wrong and who went over, and here's what your penalty is going to be. And then, okay, I get penalized. What does that penalty mean? Is this going to be part of the national legislation? You're going to be fined and sentenced to 3 to 5 years in jail. I doubt it's going to be that stringent, but these are the things that I think are going to kind of be left unsaid. And how, again, are those loopholes going to be manipulated through this process? And again, it's not if, it's going to be when those loopholes get manipulated.
Yeah, when.
Dr. Loftin, you talked about Charlie Baker and what he was wanting, and you mentioned replacing the laws through the 30 states, protecting the NCAA from the lawsuits. The other thing was he would like to eliminate athletes being employees. Brings us from NIL to NLRB. Earlier, Dartmouth withdrew its petition for the unionization of its men's basketball team. What are the ramifications of this going forward?
Well, this is highly political, Andrew, as you know. Just a very short time ago, President Biden tried to appoint the current chair of the NLRB for another 2-year term. And that was not approved by the Senate with the dissension of two people who have caucused with the Democrats, Manchin and Sinema. So they both voted against that. And so the thing died. And therefore, Trump will be able to appoint 2 people to the NLRB, which I think will cement it as a organization which has got the dominant power from the Republicans in play, and it's going to be unlikely to be friendly towards unions as the one we've had for a while has been. So that's happening. I think that probably drove the train for the law firms who are advising the Dartmouth students to pull out. A school in California, the same thing happened right there. They pulled their petition out as well. We've had a diversity of opinion among the regional NLRBs, which are usually resolved by the national organization, the federal one, at the very highest levels. And that, I think, is going to be very different now for at least 4 years. We'll see how it plays out beyond that. I'm hoping, and I think Barker made it clear, that we don't see the complete unionization of college athletics here. That'll be a very difficult thing to manage, I think, and to be useful to a 18, 19, 20-year-old athlete who all of a sudden becomes a union card carrier and has to deal with the rules. It's not like it's one-sided here. A contract would be negotiated between a union and a school to actually define not only how much money is given to the athlete, but more importantly, define what they have to do. And it would have a huge impact in terms of how the portal has to work and things like that. And we should talk at some point before we leave this podcast here about the portal. There is a proposal, as you know, out from the coaches that we should change the way the portal works right now by having one portal for a certain period of time each year. And even though they have no say in the final decision, wouldn't you want to listen to those coaches and think about how their lives are impacted by the portal and how they manage it, basically?
Absolutely. They're talking about a 10-day window in January.
Yes.
And again, as we've talked, unintended consequences in the past. Because you add a playoff, and the 12-team playoff wasn't reality in the past. It was the 4-team, and it was manageable in December, and the early signing period in December was kind of manageable for the 4 playoff teams and the bowl teams. Now that the playoff is extending into January, but there is this talk. To your point, Dr. Loftin, you absolutely have to listen to the coaches, because I don't think this is a selfish, how can I take advantage of this? This is, we are overwhelmed. Now, they moved the early signing period to you can sign at any time. That's the one thing. But I think you absolutely have to take the input of the coaches, because they are directly affected, not just by the players that they can get. I mean, this affects their jobs, Dr. Loftin. If you don't make the right decision, you don't have a job, perhaps, in a year or two. So I think, yeah, to have them listening, it's good. Again, I think we've got to kind of unwind each thread to all of this, and I think this would be a good unwinding of one of those threads that's become a little unwieldy in the recent past.
I was looking at some data here recently that says that the total money generated by college athletics, this is the revenue side of the equation, in 2022, the last year for which we have the number here, is $13.6 billion. The only pro sport that surpasses that is the NFL. And so that gives you a sense of the magnitude, though, of the problem. Now, this is many sports, obviously, but these are all sports centered on college campuses. And the number's big, and that's an issue, but in both directions, an issue because it says how impactful this is, but it also says how hard it's going to be to manage it, basically. And we know how tiered things are. You have the Power Four, which are the dominant, teams in the country, basically, financially, but they're working right alongside a group of 5 schools who are the next tier down. And I'll just remind you, the group of 5 schools were told, here's your share of the pay for play. They had no role to play in making that decision, but they were told what the decision was. And they haven't been very happy. And there are lawsuits right now, a couple of least I know of are in play right this minute from Group 5 schools saying it's unfair that we're being told what to contribute to the pay-for-play part of athletics because we had no say in it. And we'll see where those go over time. So those aren't dead yet either. I think, back to Charlie, if the NCAA gets their way here, and I suspect this time they might be able to get a good chunk of it, that might give them the same antitrust kind of protection that Major League Baseball's had, for example, for a long time. And that would be, I think, critical to be able to avoid these thousands of possible lawsuits you're going to get every time you manipulate whether a player can go or not go and things like that. It just very likely will have ongoing lawsuits for a very long time without that kind of national limitation on that happening. So that's one thing right there. But you're right. The issue that Barker has raised here is very critical, I think. He understands well the landscape of this. And Senator Cruz has come out and said pretty clearly that I think this is an important thing for the Senate to do. And that being said by a committee chairman, a person who's pretty experienced in Washington ways, I think it's very likely there'll be hearings. Hoping you're called, Andrew, to those hearings and testifying, and that those hearings will generate a bill, or at least reflect around a bill from a senator or senators, more likely, that would get traction. And the House will have more difficulty getting that done, given how thin things are there for one party compared to the other. But if a bill comes out of the Senate with strong support, it's very likely it might be able to get through the House. And then we have the president making a final decision on whether he signs that bill or not. So I think we're going to see some interesting things happening in 2025 and maybe a little bit in 26, but certainly in 25 about this. It's high time. NIL started in 2021, as you know. So we're 4 years in now, roughly, almost 4 years in. and it's time we get this thing resolved in some particular way. But I think things have really been interesting out there. There are a lot of discussions about the coaching, and also about the NIL contracts of players right now. We won't see the size of NIL contracts we have seen, I don't believe. That'll be very unlikely for that to happen. But we'll see NIL being a presence on every single college campus, I believe, going forward. And I just don't know how easy it's going to be to generate some kind of uniformity of accountability here, unless John's idea is right. I mean, if John's right, that we're going to have a office at every athletic department saying, here's the office that's going to oversee these contracts here and make sure that the contractual obligations are being met, well, it might be able to work.
Only if there's a fax machine in that office so we can fax every. You see what you mentioned about coaches. Since we last talked, and because it's been an unsettled situation, Tony Bennett steps down in Virginia. Jim Larrañaga leaves Miami. I believe this contributes. I don't know entirely. Dave Clawson, football coach, Wake Forest. There are coaches getting out of the business because of this. And I wonder, with some clarity and with some direction by the schools, do we get to keep coaches? Like, I don't know if Jay Wright was part of it. I saw Jay Wright in Indianapolis, and he said he's done with coaching. And I said, what do you do when schools call you? He says, I take every call. I thank them and say, no, I'm not interested. I'm not getting back. It has changed the landscape, and I wonder if there is more focus and more schools with departments. Can we keep the Tony Bennett's and the Jim Larrañagas as head coaches? Because I think some of these headaches are getting some long-established, very good coaches who have had positive impacts with their players getting out of the sports.
Yeah, and don't forget Nick Saban in that list.
Yeah.
So I do think that's going to be a continued trend, because it's just I think it's a natural progression of the process. I think that money that had been going to coaches now has got to be redirected, and you're going to see a lot more of those contracts that are very incentive laden. You're certainly at the base is still a tremendous salary for these coaches and all across the sports, but those incentives will help the good ones sort of earn their pay, if you will. So I think you're going to see more of that. And I think one thing that I haven't seen anything through this whole process on, and Dr. Loftin, you may have seen it, but I've looked, I don't see anything about where it talks about students and going to class anymore through this process, or students with grades, right? So what is that, in terms of, as these guys go from portal to portal, 7 schools in 5 years, how do they ever get any classroom time or work there? So is that going to be something that could be built into this? Okay, if your students graduate, that you get paid for that. Is that part of the contract, if you will, that you now executed at a school from that standpoint? But it's just been interesting to see the whole lack of the graduation rates and the student athletes on what it's going to do to impact their their educational process through this brave new world.
Well, there was a time, John, when I was doing contracts pretty regularly, and in a couple of cases, I actually got into the contract specifics about the academic performance for a team. I was mostly concerned about basketball for obvious reasons. I mean, football has got problems, obviously, with that, but it's a big team. Basketball's not that many, and so in negotiating with 2 specific basketball coaches that I was trying to get hired, I did bring up the APR, and I said, let's put that into the contract. And their reaction wasn't very positive. You can imagine that. And but I was able to get them to think about that pretty hard in terms of how that would be measured and how that would impact their longevity, their pay and so I actually got it into the contract as bonuses. So you got a bonus if your APR exceeded a particular threshold. And that was the easiest thing to negotiate, because it wasn't something that was in the base contract. It was an add-on, basically, much like a bowl game or something like that is today. So that's out there. And so I think we have examples of academic performance in the past. But you're right. I've quit using the term student athlete for a good reason. It's not very apropos anymore, is it? Yeah. There's not a lot of student in the athlete side of the equation, as far as I can tell right now. Now, having said that, if you get to know these kids as I have, and you do, Andrew, and you do, John, I mean, there are quite a few serious academic stars among our athletes. It's not always in all the sports, but certainly in some sports, we've had outstanding young people come through universities and do very well academically while they were doing very well athletically as well. As I've told you, when I would graduate kids at Texas A&M and Missouri both, I would specifically take a little extra time with every student athlete and say to them, thank you for doing two full-time jobs, because they were two full-time jobs. I'm hoping we don't lose track of that, because universities still exist, in my opinion, principally not to entertain me and you and you, but to actually teach something, to turn out a student who has more skills going out than they had coming in. And I think we just can't lose sight of that particular purpose, because after all, most universities have 400, 500 athletes, and they may have, in the case of Texas A&M, 75,000 students. Okay. And in the case of Missouri, 36,000, whatever it's got right now. So, I mean, the numbers are still very skewed between the total population of students and those who are athletes. And we just can't lose track of where the weight of the institution has to be maintained, which is towards both the transmission of and discovery of knowledge. That's the key.
That's the tricky part, isn't it, Dr. Loftin? And for lack of a better phrase, the professionalization of college sports now. It is tricky. The other thing Charlie Baker talked about in that article that you shared with us was that the NCAA may help with this House settlement that's coming in April because of ticket revenue, because of TV revenue, may lessen some of that burden. But what's interesting, when Charlie Baker says that the NCAA, that's the individual schools. It's not like the NCAA in Indianapolis is going to pay this thing off. Trev Alberts said that at Texas A&M. He said, the NCAA is us. So I wish Charlie would kind of change the way he talks. Look, what he's talking about, the revenue is from championships, from the playoff. I get that. And the TV revenue deals, I get that. That's where the NCAA helps. But when we're talking about what each individual school, whether it's a P4, whether it's a group of 6, whatever that is us. That is each individual college. But I'm glad to see that with that revenue, I'm glad to see that's it, because talk about being able to generate that revenue through tickets, through TV revenue, through what the new TV deals will be. Hopefully that will ameliorate some of the burden on the colleges. But I really wish that verbiage would change from the NCAA to however many NCAA schools have to pay into this settlement for the next 10 years.
Oh, you're right, Andrew. I mean, it is our money. And again, the NCAA has built reserves, and you could argue about that being the right thing to do. Men's basketball generates shares. So if you participate in a tournament, you get shares. And in the future, not immediately, in the future, you get money. Well, what's going to happen now is the $1.2 billion or so that he talks about there is going to be money that they have in the bank today or in the future that will not go to schools. Yeah. They'll go to the athletes. And they're saying, by the way, you must also pay some more money besides that. So the schools are going to cough up not simply money themselves for this, but lose revenue that they would have gotten or been entitled to ultimately themselves. The one bright spot here is they're finally talking about doing the same thing with women's basketball as with men's. So there's a very good likelihood, I think, we're going to start having shares accumulate for women's athletics at that level, so that there'll be some payback to the schools ultimately from the tournaments run by the NCAA. That's been their big moneymaker, the men's tournament, and they're going to augment that presumably by adding a women's tournament component, which is already there, but there's no revenue sharing tied into that if there is for the men's right now. And that would be a good thing, I believe, going forward. I think there's lots of opportunity. I mean, women's sports has gone through a lot of growth and a lot of recognition and a lot of support over the last few years, gentlemen. You know that. And you see it yourselves. And the women in soccer have been able to turn that into, professionally anyway, a better deal for themselves. I don't see that for the WNBA yet, my friends. I don't see that yet there. But will it not come? Will there be some leveling of the playing field here ultimately for not just the ability to play sports, but to be compensated for playing sports?
John, that's evidenced by the new deal that women's basketball helped drive with ESPN, correct?
Yeah, it's happening. So you're seeing the valuations jump up in there. And I think, again, I was looking at some of the top 200 televised events, and I think there were 12 women's events in it for the first time. So that again, that shows that the market's there, people are seeing it, and eventually the dollars follow. So I think, again, a lot of people have it. Again, it's interesting to see in the WNBA. A lot of people should be thanking Caitlin Clark every time they take the court with her for what she's doing to help raise their profile and what all she's done to help elevate women's basketball and women's sports in general. And new volleyball leagues too are starting as well. So
I was just going to transition to that. You can have an NFL game, and then there was Nebraska volleyball on after that on Fox. When that becomes appealing to the networks, that shows a significant rise in growth and appeal, does it not?
Absolutely. If they're looking at their schedule and they're competing against another NFL game, usually at that particular point in time, it's going to be some collegiate sport. They're putting volleyball in there ahead of men's and women's basketball now. So I think that's a very plus for the sport in general and for college athletics, particularly on the women's side. So I think, again, you're going to see more and more of those types of sports find their way and be able to be monetizing some of that those sports media rights that are out there from that, particularly as we move into more of a more dominant streaming world as well.
John, there was a paragraph in the article that Dr. Loftin shared with us about Charlie Baker, talking about how the NCAA with the revenue. But I love this because I know this is big for you. The NCAA is also tapping into a data sharing initiative that helps it seek out and gain more insight from fans, which then allows it to market to them a little more easily. Better late than never for the NCAA, correct?
Absolutely. I think that's been a trend for the last, at least 10 plus years. But I think now that the NCAA is seeing the value of that, and I saw Charlie speak at the SBJ Collegiate Athletic Forum back in December. And one of the things that he was talking about was we know who's buying tickets. We're able to track that from all these NCAA championships. We've got a database, I want to say it was over 500,000 people and growing. How do we make sure that we communicate with that group? We know those are college sports fans. How do we get them more involved in the ecosystem and be able to get them to come in and support athletics more than just ticket buying? So I do think, again, the data, they're seeing the value of that data out there, and because of their partners and who they're able to collect that data information from, will be very valuable not only to the schools but to potential sponsors as well.
John, does that also apply to the news today, actually, that the Rangers are going to Victory Plus, streaming their games? DirecTV is going to a skinny bundle of sports called My Sports. And ESPN, Venue is now dead, but ESPN might team up with Fubo. Does data collection become a part of that as well as other bigger things?
It's certainly, if you look at what the teams are doing in terms of their direct-to-consumer, you saw the Victory Plus announcement. So and if you were where they got started with the Dallas Stars, and the Stars did a very bold move, and they're basically Victory Plus is free. So you download the app, you can watch a Dallas Stars game for free. They are betting on the concept that and more people download those games. It's free. There are no barriers to entry. That they'll be able to get those fans, and then the advertising will help them pay. Create potentially greater revenue than it would from a subscription model. The Major League Baseball teams, they're behind a paywall right now because there's a lot of other factors on that too, but it impacts the economics of their existing local deals too. Even though those revenues are dropping, they're still significant, and trying to keep that ecosystem in place. That they're sort of behind that paywall right now, and I think, again, you'll see more teams, I think, go the free Victory Plus way over time, but probably not in the near term. I think again you see those teams staying behind the paywall, but even behind the paywall, that data that you get is very valuable, and I think the teams now are realizing that instead of getting a check from someone like our old days, Andrew at Fox Sports Southwest. That check might not be as big, but if they can grow some of the data here, that data can be translated into grow revenue streams through that relationship with that said customer. So I think they're seeing the value of that, and that's going to be a big part of the future. And I think, again, you'll actually see a revenue bucket now at some point in a team's organizational P&L that's going to be tied into that data collection and the value of that data. So I think that's all part of the world that we're going to see changing. And then the other interesting thing you brought up was the venue and what DirecTVs are doing is now the one thing about the cable bundle that made it great was you wrote one check and you got everything. Not everybody liked the buffet or the smorgasbord. Somebody wanted to have their a la carte, be able to buy a salad, be able to buy a hamburger, and that's what we're happening in that sort of analogy in the world of sports today. But now what people are trying to swing back to is what is the bundle that we can create that's going to create the greatest value out there. And I think, again, ESPN's obviously been the most aggressive with their plans with Flagship, their conversations with venue. I think they're looking to try to find the right strategic partners to continue to grow that because, again, they're still getting significant revenue from that cable bundle. So they've got to be very careful threading that needle through that process so they don't necessarily bite the hand that's been feeding them for these past 30, 40 years and have really created the behemoth and economic juggernaut that ABC, Disney, ESPN is because of their ability to capitalize on all their live sports rights over the years. But I think the customers and the fans out there are getting frustrated because they can't find that bundle again. And when they start to add up all their different subscriptions and whatnot, they're finding out that, hey, this cable bundle wasn't so bad because I was paying $100 and now I'm paying $150. So I think, again, the next strategy is who kind of creates that bundle, that skinny bundle that kind of hits that sweet spot with that sports fan that he says, okay, and am I getting all the sports that I need out there? All these bundles right now have holes in it. Not every single team or league is part of that. So I think, again, if you're able to string a few of those together, that's where I think you're seeing that shift now becoming because the marketplace is telling them, we don't want to pay $19.95 to watch the Utah Jazz. I'd like to watch the Utah Jazz as part of a broader network or bundle. How's that bundle going to come together? And I think that's what you're starting to see. And even DirecTV, even though today they didn't offer it, but if you read through that press release, they're going to have sort of those regional sports network as bolt-ons or add-ons at some point later on down the road. So yeah. I think that's designed to create a more friendly packaging of content that you'll see in probably in entertainment and sports and potentially news. They'll look at to try to bundle all those types of three versions out there.
We've gone from broadcasting to niche casting, right? But still, with the ratings of the two semifinals at either 18 million and 20 million, an advertiser can't do that. That's why it's still sports as programming, correct?
No, and I just saw a note this week that Fox has the Super Bowl. The average 30-second spot in the Super Bowl this year is going for $7 million. They are completely sold out. They're creating a waiting list now, and to be part of that waiting list, you have to commit to buy other content across the Fox platforms. And again, they're doing that because they realize the value of live sports, and particularly that event, 100+ million people watching, is going to be a huge day. And those advertisers want to be in that type of broadcast because no one else can deliver that kind of reach across the country or in any type of thing out there today, not even come close. So again, I think at $7 million, that's probably still a pretty good buy for a Super Bowl ad.
Yeah, considering the number that you reach, that's for sure. Dr. Loftin, very recently you sent something. This is intriguing to me. This topic of Missouri had to borrow money to cover a deficit. What are the ramifications of that?
Well, I haven't looked into it as far as I'm going to, but when I got to Missouri as chancellor, they had taken a big hit in the dissociation from the Big 12 and the move to the SEC. They are the second smallest stadium in the SEC. And so whereas a Texas A&M or an Ohio State has 100,000 plus seats to sell and generates a lot of revenue from that for ticket sales alone, they're 60,000 roughly. And so they're trying to make their state, they jacked up their prices for season tickets for this coming football season. That's been jacked up a lot. They are renovating their stadium even further, not to create that many more seats, but to create more expensive spaces. that people will be justifying to pay for. But they actually had a deficit from the last fiscal year, $15 million, which in the SEC is almost unique. The only school with a bigger one is Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt has accepted that for a long time and subsidized it because they know they'll never have the population of fans there and sponsorships they would need to really offset that. So there's a much larger deficit every year at Vanderbilt, but that's understood and they cover it. This is not something that Missouri wants to do. They have the same guy as their system president and their campus chancellor, a guy named Troy, and he has kind of downplayed this a bit. But the reality is that there is a $15 million hole. And that hole is there primarily in spite of a very successful football season by most measures. That hole is there because they have such a small venue and they cannot generate the revenue bigger schools can generate from ticket sales and sponsorships in the stadium itself. That's the biggie. Now, how they correct that. Jacking up prices is one solution, but is that a real good answer, guys? I mean, there's a limit. People get tired of paying a lot of money. I have a big bill for my football tickets every year, guys, and you
but
do
this
too.
is the time to do it.
I shouldn't say you don't have it, Andrew, but
no.
but I do.
But this is the time to do it because they're coming off 2 very successful seasons.
Yes, they are, and they've had a great couple of years, and they're using that to justify this. But they've also spent money. They're spending money, a lot of money, some of it private money, to be able to make their stadium nicer. To add amenities here and yon around the stadium to enhance their recruiting. You know that even though facilities are becoming kind of blasé and not as important as NIL in some respects, they don't go away. Attracting a kid there is still tied a bit to what the amenities are going to be at that particular location compared to someplace else. So students are looking at 2 things. How much money will I get? NIL money will I get? And how much money will I be able to enjoy, shall we say, being spent on me there? And I think facilities are still going to be an important piece of this going forward, even though not nearly as prominent as they have been for the last decade or so. Just the other day, guys, I was over at the academic building at Texas A&M's Kyle Field. You've probably both been in there by now, but I was interested in what they had there. They have a whole section of their building devoted to NIL. And in that section, there are 2 studios in there. So if you are a social media person, and that's true of many of the female athletes and a number of the guys as well, you can go in there and create your content right there. So there's a studio for you to use, reserve time in, go in there. The technology is there for you to record your TikTok, your Instagram reel, and to get that ready to go to satisfy your NIL funding that you're getting from some outside entity. That's reality at Texas A&M right now. And there is a full-time guy there in terms of their operations who is in charge of the NIL work that they're doing within that athletic department here. This is for football. It's in football, but it's not just for football. Other athletes can use that as well. It's just upstairs from the common dining hall they use down below to feed their athletes. So even though this building is attached to their football stadium, and the money was generated obviously by football people in terms of the support they get, it is actually serving all the athletes at Texas A&M right now. And I think that's going to be a harbinger of what's going to happen.
I think that's the wave of the future.
NIL gets bigger and bigger. You're going to have to provide a level of support for people creating content, creating value for the folks who are paying them through a contract to do something.
John, back to what you've talked about, not just schools, players are brands now.
Yeah. So again, to grow that NIL brand, and if you're able to utilize your school IP, able to do that, it's a lot more valuable to the advertising community to have that relationship. So I think again, and they're going to be students that are, student athletes that are better at it than others, and those ones can really help probably grow their brand in that space. And again, more people are looking for that type of social influence. And it's not just individual content, it's content created following around the program as well. I saw an interesting, actually, I think I heard this on TexAgs today. They were talking about an interesting scenario where Jerry hires Dion and they do a Netflix special and they charge him $8 to $10 million and he's able to pay the coach off just because he created that content, which would probably be very attractive to the the rank and file who want to watch the inner goings and the circus atmosphere of the Dallas Cowboys. So I thought that was a pretty fascinating approach. So I think, again, you're going to see more and more of those types of creative collaborations, too, because content is continue to be king. And if you find the right content and can hit on that, it's going to be valuable to advertisers and help grow that NIL revenue opportunity.
The word of the future, monetize. You're going to have to monetize. You're already $20 million in the hole. Yeah. That's the cover charge to get to play for the next 10 years. Yeah. You have to learn to monetize. And John, to your point, I love what you just said. I don't think it's exclusive to just college sports. I think you're going to, like you say, how do you pay off that new contract? Yeah. What we didn't talk about was giving some salary back for your NIL. That's what happened at FSU, right? Under Mike Norvell. Yeah. That's part of this ever-changing landscape. We're not going to fire you, and you don't have to change your assistant coaches, or you do have to change your assistant coaches. You can keep your job if we reduce your salary. Here's how we do that, by just reapportioning some of the money from that contract. I thought that was fascinating.
Thought it was brilliant. Yeah.
And a coach says, I get to keep coaching? Yeah, you can do that.
Everyone wins in that scenario.
Yeah. And interesting at Florida State, because they've always kind of played catch up with their athletic department, not as deep as other ones. There was a lot of fight about what they wanted to do there in that capital city. They wanted almost like an athletic village around Doak Campbell Stadium, but very much behind the other schools, and not just having to play catch up, but go from the heights to really the depths in a course of a season. I imagine there's a lot going on there in Tallahassee, but I'm with you, John. I thought that was a fascinating move to do that, and there wasn't the pushback from Mike Norvell like there was from Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State.
Yeah. And actually, even if you go back to the Jim Harbaugh world, I don't think he pushed back that hard, too, on that. He realized that, okay, the team hadn't done what they were supposed to do, and he said, I bet on myself, and it worked out. Michigan wins a national championship, and I think, again, that model does work versus firing a coach, bringing in somebody new. And, again, how long does that put you back before you're you're able to be back in that conversation?
That's a really important point, because then it tarnishes the brand if you keep doing that. Yeah. Keep spinning your wheels. Well, it's going to be a heck of a 2025, guys. We've just started. But there is so much coming down the pike. I can't wait to share it all with you watching. We appreciate that. And with the two of you. Dr. Loftin, thank you.
We have the Monaco brand. Don't forget that.
Yes, we do.
Monaco brand.
Yes, we do. I will share my email with you so we can monetize that. We can do that. Hey, collegesportsftm@gmail.com. If you have a question, we will certainly answer. John, thank you very much. Dr. Loftin, thank you. To Nick Savage, our producer, thank you as well. For all of you watching and joining us for this, thank you as well. I'm Andrew Monaco. We'll see you on the next edition of College Sports Follow the Money here on TexAgs.